Welcome to this evening's presentation by Professor Ralph Buultjens, an esteemed and distinguished member of the faculty of the School of Professional Studies Center for Global Affairs. I should have said NYU first. I'm Vera Jelinek, and I'm the Divisional Dean of the Center for Global Affairs, and it has been my pleasure to work with Professor Buultjens for many years, long before there was a Center for Global Affairs. He needs no introduction. Renowned historian, lecturer, author, teacher. His fame extends way beyond the classroom, so instead of citing his academic achievements, the many books that he has written, which you can all find on the web, I want to give you a personal account. Our Center for Global Affairs celebrates its 10th anniversary this year, but my friendship with Ralph, if I may just say Ralph now, goes back much farther in time to 1984, when I began to work at the School of Professional Studies. It had a different name then. In 1986, I wrote to him, and I fished out a very tattered letter. There's not email at the time, and I'll quote, "All I need is for you to find the time to do a course for me. I think I deserve it after 2 years of trying." Do you remember that? The fall of '87 would be perfect. Wassily Leontief, for those of you who don't remember him, he was the Nobel laureate in economics, and I occasionally walked to work with him. Wassily endorses my invitation. I don't know if it was my invitation or Wassily's endorsement, but I succeeded. And Ralph has been teaching ever since the fall of '87. First, it was one session at Midtown with a small group of students. A semester later, enrollments jumped to 80, and the rest is history. We now offer 4 sections of his course each semester, 3 during the day, 1 at night, and they all fill to capacity, and by capacity, I mean hundreds. How to explain such popularity? You will be able to judge for yourselves, but just a few insights from my perspective. He has a mastery of past and present history and raises timely questions about the future. He is the best synthesizer that I know of events, and his presentations are flawless and captivating. While it may seem to you, as it did initially to me, that his presentations are effortless, let me assure you that this is not the case. They represent tremendous scholarly research, travel, and intense preparation. I think you will agree that in order to make sense of complex events and to simplify them, you need a huge amount of knowledge. I accompanied him for about 5 or 6 years to Florida, where he gave a series of lectures on global politics, which grew to be so large that we had to find alternate auditoria. I joke that I was his designated driver, and he worked all morning and only emerged in the afternoon, despite all my entreaties to enjoy the sun. He's a consummate professional who travels the world and studies what he teaches. Let me end with a description of a prize that he was awarded. It was the Toynbee Prize. It was the Toynbee Prize in the Social Sciences, and it was awarded by the then Prime Minister of India, Madam Indira Gandhi. The electors were about 1,000 scholars, academics, researchers. It was a very, very prestigious gift, award, I should say, and we should all be very proud of that. For those of you who are here for the first time at the center, I hope that you will get to know us better. I invite you to enroll not only in the courses that Professor Buultjens teaches, but also the many others that we offer year-round. I guarantee that the programs that you find described in your folders will open up windows and understanding to the complexities that we all face in today's world. And finally, I have the honor of addressing you tonight, and I do at many events, but the idea for and the execution of this event came not from me, but from our Director of Continuing Education, Michelle D'Amico, whom some of you may have met outside, and she always disappears on me, and I can't see her right now. And she and Alice Eckstein, who's the Executive Director of the Center, are the crafters of our amazing non-credit and public events programming. So I hope that we'll see more of you and that you'll be with us. And now please join me in welcoming Professor Buultjens.
The commercial is over. Let me begin with two big thank yous. First to Dr. Vera Jelinek for those generous comments. Vera, your introduction is so bewitching that I should take you with me wherever I go, not only for introductions. I want also to thank Michelle D'Amico, who put this together, and those at the Center of Global Affairs who helped her. My second big thank you is to you for coming out on this inhospitable evening, knowing full well that world politics is not a particularly cheerful, jolly happening these days. And that's because world politics are the way it is. But if you're disappointed tonight, remember that you generally get exactly what you pay for. Today, of course, is a very special day, the 13th anniversary of a happening that changed modern history. 9/11 was the beginning of a new era, an era that has dramatically reshaped the world politics, economics, public discourse, security, and our expectations of the future. It is an event that has touched every part of our lives. 9/11, quite suddenly, unleashed a number of hidden demons, demons which are now infecting global affairs and that are redefining the relationship between countries and peoples. We don't know what the eventual outcome of this new era will be. We are still in its early moments, but we do know this. It will be many years, maybe decades, before we can escape from the baleful legacy of 9/11 and exorcise the ghost of Osama bin Laden and his political children. And yet, although these are depressing times, there's another feature to our moment. We must not forget that we are also in an age when many good things are unfolding, good things that have the potential for changing human life for the better, to bring to the average man and woman all over the world benefits that our ancestors never dreamed of, like universal literacy, computer literacy, life-saving technologies, intimate communications between ordinary people. And if you are depressed about the future of democracy, just remember this. This year, space of a few months, we have seen 25% of the world's population, 3 of the world's largest countries, India, Indonesia, Brazil, go through democratic elections, having free and fair changes of government. And that is a validation of democracy itself. This paradox is at the heart of world politics today. On one hand, there is gathering confusion, disorder, hostility. On the other hand, there are these life-enhancing advances, potentials. The generation that is destroying us is also the generation that is improving us. This paradox, this conundrum, is what I want to explore with you tonight, for it is at the heart of world politics. There are two ways of looking at world politics. One perspective is historical. You may say vertical, yesterday, today, tomorrow. To examine a process which goes on and which we are part of, to try and understand what is happening today in that long flow of history. Are we seeing the latest phase of an old struggle between the West and the rest, something that has gone on from Plato to NATO? Is the historical process that's unfolding something that is going to take a long time to play out? Okay. Historical processes are very slow, and we are in one of those rare historical moments when the process is going through some reorientation. So, one way of looking at world politics is to take a long-term perspective. Another perspective is, of course, much more immediate and contemporary. You might call it horizontal. What's happening around us? How do we act and react to current events? How do we cope? How do we confront the immediate realities of our time? This period is unusual because right now we have a troubled historical context and a troubled contemporary context, and they overlap. Rare is the time when historical difficulties coincide with immediate current difficulties. Let me begin with the historical complexities within which we live today. What is our historical moment in terms of world politics? It is this. About 500 years ago, there was a fundamental change in the global balance of power. The great powers of that time were old imperial China, the Islamic empires of the Middle East and the Mediterranean, and pre-Columbian kingdoms in Central America. They had wealth, they produced innovations, they were dominant great powers, and they had been so for quite some time. Europe was a sideshow. North America was unknown. Then quite suddenly, about 1500, a small group of European nations began reaching out and with superior military technology started a global takeover. Soon an era of Western supremacy began. Empires, settlements, wealth extraction. It was the conquest of the planet by people of white European stock. Europe became rich, powerful, the center of the world. By 1914, 100 years ago, on the eve of the First World War, 84% of the world's land area was owned, occupied, settled, controlled by white people. As Europe began to fade away in the 20th century, the West found a new standard bearer. America succeeded as the center of the world, politically, economically, technologically. The North Atlantic continued to control and dominate the world, and the rest of the world was subordinated. We sometimes fail to appreciate how much resentment this long Western domination has caused in the world at large. Now, for the first time in 500 years, that Western domination is being contested. And most interestingly, by the very powers who were displaced by the West 500 years ago, Islamic forces and China. You know, power comes and power goes, but memory of past greatness and the desire to come back is a great motivator. And now, after centuries in the back seat, these countries have the capacity and the ambition to drive the car, and they're asserting it. For the first time in 500 years, we now see Western political strength challenged. Nations do things which we don't like. There's not much we can do about it. Okay. Forces arise that we don't like. We have to coexist with them. For the first time in 500 years, we see a huge amount of capital flowing from the West to non-Western areas. For 500 years, it has been the other way around. Trade, energy, raw material balances are sucking money from the West. Some of it comes back as non-Western investments take place by buying up Western assets. In the past few decades, from Suez in the 1950s to Vietnam in the 60s and 70s, through Afghanistan and Iran and elsewhere, Western armies, which once were all victorious, have been notably unsuccessful. Western technology is still way ahead, but the rest are catching up. And the flow of people has been hugely reversed. For 500 years, Westerners went to non-Western regions. Now every Western country faces an attempt by non-Westerners to come and reside there. The West, and I mean America particularly, has not lost. But the fact is that the West faces challenges that it hasn't faced for a long time. Now the West is responding, it's trying to assert itself, making alliances with non-Western nations. For example, the growing American connection to India, the American relationship with Vietnam, trade agreements, technology exchanges, military links, cultural impacts. But there is a certain problem here. The West is stronger when it's united. But now it is not. We've gotten into a big row with Russia today. In historical terms, this is an unusual era. Long dominance being challenged. Will the West be able to retain its position? Will the non-West reverse the historical balance of power? Will there be a standoff of hostility? Will there be a new global synthesis? We don't know. We're right in the midst of this process. But what we do see is that for the first time in 5 centuries, there is a determined effort to try and rearrange the historic power structure of the world. All of this is part of the ebb and flow of planetary political history. And right now, that is the long-term context in which we live and our politics unfolds. The moment has become more intense because this long-term process and its uncertainty creates a layer of tension, fears of decline, tendencies to overreach and overreact, suspicions and resentments. And that is even more complicated by the fact that in current affairs, we have entered a period of great disturbance, partly as a result of 9/11, but certainly after 9/11. So there are layers of complexity. Occasionally, the immediate context of world politics, current affairs, becomes complicated and difficult. From time to time, there are bad periods, then things settle down. But they don't settle down permanently. We're always in the midst of oscillating between short-term ups and downs. In current affairs, good times are not everlasting, bad times are not for always. World politics from day to day is a struggle, a competition. Negative forces arise, disruptions take place, sometimes things get pretty bad and confrontations happen. Sometimes things calm down and the world becomes more cooperative. In life, as individuals get stronger, richer, more powerful, they seem to want to dominate others, to rise, to have that recognition of having risen. And they clash with those who are already at the top. It's what we call upward mobility, it's called class conflict, it's called have-nots becoming haves. As in human life, so too in world politics. Nations rise, and when they rise, they think they're strong enough to upset the existing established order, especially when the guys at the top are not doing very well. Sometimes the good guys win, sometimes the bad guys do well, and always the big fish eat the little fish. Take the past century. We have gone through several of these cycles: the First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War. In each case, nations and forces arise, they challenge the existing order of world power, peacekeeping institutions are ineffective, conflicts take place, empires collapse, there are periods of peace and stability which follow, winners and losers emerge, and then the cycle begins again. Each cycle begins when certain nations become increasingly powerful. Germany twice, the Soviet Union. Awful ideas begin to percolate in world affairs. German imperialism, fascism, communism. Western democracies are threatened. Invasions and big conflicts take place. The League of Nations, the United Nations is ineffective. Big empires like the European empires and the Soviet Empire collapse. New countries are created, and then there are post-conflict periods of peace and stability for a while. This happened after the First World War. It happened after the Second World War. It happened after the Cold War. Things stabilized for a while, and we had a period of relative peace and prosperity from about 1980 to about 2000 or so. Now it seems that the cycle is beginning again. China rises and asserts itself. Jihadism becomes a dynamic and vicious ideology. ISIS invades Iraq, and America itself has invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. Democracies feel threatened. And yesterday, President Obama declared war against jihadism. I am not sure whether it's a declaration of war against ISIS, a particular group, or the whole field of jihadism. Okay. All these are the components of a new cycle, which has been gathering since 9/11. So there is a pattern here, but not an exact pattern. In the past, the disruptive forces have been within the West, Germany with its sidekick Japan, and the Soviet Union. Now it is more complex because the challenge comes from non-Western areas, China economically and politically, jihadism geopolitically. We have to face these. But, while we are divided, the jihadists are also very much divided between Sunni and Shias. It is not very clear as yet what is at stake: the security of the Western world and its position in global affairs, global order, stability in the Middle East. What empires are at risk, if we want to call it, maybe the American empire, or maybe the remnants of the Russian empire, the security of Israel. What is the major concern of the Western world? That its position will decline. Okay. We are not precisely sure of the stakes, but we know they are very high. To elaborate on this situation, I will discuss 4 centers of power where history is being made today. History is not being made in Latin America or Africa or India, important as they are. History is being made by the interaction between 4 power centers in the world, which will determine the fate of world politics in the 21st century. The cockpit of many of these concerns is the Middle East, and the Middle East is collapsing. In 20 years, it has gone through enormous and horrible upheavals. American invasions, and each invasion has made the problems worse. Explosions of terrorism, the rise and fall of the Arab Spring, war between Sunni and Shia, sectarian war between Sunni and Shia Muslims, the advance and retreat of peace possibilities between Israel and the Palestinians, Western bombing of Libya, Iran and the nuclear issues, civil wars in Syria, Iraq, Turkey. Lebanon has been without a government for months and worse. And now we have brutal militaries in Egypt and Algeria, large private armed militias like Hezbollah, Hamas, Iraqi groups, Syrian dissidents. We have rich but scared monarchies like Saudi Arabia and Gulf principalities. Iran in great tension between theocrats and reformers, Turkey drifting towards authoritarianism, Israel in Gaza. These are innumerable conflicts, and in one way or the other, they affect America. But remember this, the Middle East from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean is a snake pit. And outsiders who get into snake pits get badly bitten. So what should we do? My own view is somewhat controversial, but it is this. Given our improving energy situation, we have no need to get overly involved in the Middle East. Let it burn itself out. We should stay as far as possible away from the Middle East, subject to two things. Number one, the security of Israel. Number two, the export of terrorism and jihadism to America. Let me expand on these two constructs which are so important in our relationship with the Middle East. First, Israel. Israel must always be seen in the context of Jewish history. The past 6 or 7 decades have been the most momentous in Jewish history since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 BC. Two enormous interconnected events have happened: the annihilation of European Jewry in the Holocaust and the creation of the State of Israel. No period in Jewish history in the past 2,000 years has been so fateful. The quest for security for Israel is lodged in the land. Yet today, Israel is stronger than it has ever been before, and Israel's prospects have never been better. In technology, electronic, desalination, military, and so on, it's a world leader. Its oil and natural gas potential is great. Its economic relations are extraordinary. 40% of its national product comes from exports, higher than any non-petroleum country. It has a superbly educated labor force. But what is most remarkable about the Israeli situation right now is this: that so many of its neighbors have been so quiet about Israel's actions in Gaza. America and Western Europe have been more noisy about Israel's actions in Gaza than its own neighbors. Okay. This is extraordinary. Okay. Nothing much from Egypt or Saudi Arabia, several other Islamic states. Now, Israel also has very good relations with Russia, India, and China. So one would say that Israel's situation is pretty good. But there's one single issue that darkens the picture and complicates events in the Middle East: the relationship with the Palestinians. If that can be worked out, there are huge benefits to Israel and to the Middle East. But it cannot be worked out by expanding settlements on the West Bank. And unless that one issue is resolved, Israel's future will be clouded. Can it be worked out? Well, America has tried and tried again and failed, and almost everyone has tried and failed. And it is quite clear that you can't get an agreement by bullying or pushing Israel around. It is now up to the Israelis to do it themselves, and they are strong enough to do so. But do they have the political commitment to do so? I think eventually it will happen, but the longer it is delayed, the more problems it will create. How long can Israel keep pounding Gaza? And how long can Hamas continue being provocative and preventing the development of the Palestinian territories. The fact is that any agreement, even one that is not the best, will contribute more to Israel's security than any military operation. Perhaps Israeli elections, which seem to be coming soon, will create an opening here. But Israel is part of this large Middle Eastern mosaic that is of great concern to this country. The second American concern is the export of jihadism. And we are very right to be concerned about it, especially the barbaric actions of ISIS. And we must punish them for eviscerating Americans. But we have to be very careful in this. America cannot fight ISIS alone. The present much talked about things like building an anti-ISIS coalition is very questionable because most of the members of the anti-ISIS coalition are Western members who have signed up, Britain and France and Australia and Canada, Italy, Poland, Denmark, reluctantly maybe Turkey to some extent, Saudi Arabia tentatively, but so far not a single Arab state has put boots on the ground. If the Islamic states in the Middle East are not willing to openly, publicly commit men and money to anti-ISIS action, the West will not be able to do very much. We're trying to get public commitments from these states, and we should, but seem to be reluctant to do so. America should not and cannot be the major driving force in this. We can help, we can assist, but we have to be very careful that our activity is not perceived as an anti-Islamic crusade. And to invest our hopes in a new, partially created Iraqi government is a rather dubious proposition. When I listened to President Obama yesterday, I thought, there we go again. Are we going to destroy Iraq in order to save it? Okay. After all, what is ISIS? It's a small group of Sunni warriors who have been successful in creating a kind of state which governs about 8 million people, most of whom hate ISIS, partly in Iraq and partly in Syria. Its territory today is scattered bits of land, totaling roughly about the size of Maryland, mostly in Iraq. Its military is about 7,000 to 10,000 troops, armed with weapons that have been taken from the Iraqi military or Syrian soldiers. Some of them have been our weapons, financed by money that they have stolen or has been contributed by extremists. They have benefited from the confusion in the Iraqi government and the civil war in Syria. They are a horrible force, but we must not turn this into a major world conflict. They must be punished for killing Americans, but today they are less a threat to the American homeland than Al-Qaeda. We should be very careful in jumping into civil and religious wars that are going on in the Middle East with alliances that can change overnight, enemies that can emerge anywhere, and costs that will be endless. The situation around ISIS is confusing and very symbolic of the Middle East. Assad's government in Syria and Al-Qaeda are against ISIS. So is Hezbollah. Can we defeat ISIS without strengthening Assad? Without strengthening Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah? Okay. They are on our side, so is Iran. Funny allies. Can outsiders fight ISIS when the Iraqi army, which we have trained and armed for years, just ran away in the first encounters? Whom should we arm? Whom should we give weapons to in our conflict with ISIS? In the Middle East, when you give weapons to good guys, they always end up in the hands of bad guys. We should be very clear about the limits of our intervention. Okay. Can we organize? Can we finance a full-scale war against ISIS? ISIS will come and go, but there will be many other ISIS in the future. Are we then committed to fighting every group like that? Okay. In the meanwhile, what about Iran? Iran has troops on the ground against ISIS. Okay. And Iran is also involved in talking to us about nuclear weapons. We have another deadline for an agreement by November 24th. What if we fail to get some agreement? If we take on ISIS, can we also take on Iran? But Iran is part of a larger question, global nuclear proliferation. If North Korea can make nukes, almost any country which is determined to can make nukes. This is something about which we and other major nations should be working together to create an anti-proliferation coalition, which is perhaps more important than an anti-ISIS coalition. This indicates another problem for America. In how many places, in how many parts of the world can we be militarily active? We are now in Iraq, the borders of Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, helping the Kurds, in Yemen, in several regions of Africa, pumping up our involvement in NATO, Eastern Europe, on the borders of Russia, expanding our military relationships in the Chinese seas, connecting militarily more than ever to Japan. Are we falling into the trap of overextending ourselves? Now, some of this may be desirable, but are we economically able to do this without damaging ourselves? Can we be the policeman of the world? And ultimately, can you end terrorism by simply killing terrorists alone? All this suggests that we have to make choices. We cannot do everything. We cannot confront Russia, resist China, fight jihadism all at the same time. So we have to decide our priorities. And I think one of them should be readdressing our relationship with Russia. Russia has a new Tsar. We'll have to think of working with him as indeed we worked with the old Tsars and with Stalin in the Second World War. Putin could be a formidable ally against terrorism and jihadism, which deeply concern him. He too does not want nuclear proliferation. He wants economic ties with the West. We should not drive him into the arms of the Chinese. We must understand that we cannot frighten Russia with threats or sanctions or mobilizing Europe against them. Maybe instead of another Cold War, we should consider some accommodation, unpleasant as it is, with Russia. So in the next few months and years, there are big choices to be made. But there are choices for Russia too. Has Putin overreacted? As he focuses on Eastern Europe and Ukraine, tries to develop his links to the Crimea, there must surely be in the back of his mind one thought. A huge China lurks over a thinly populated but resource-rich Asian part of Russia, a part of Asia that was once belonged to China. If Putin goes too far into Eastern Europe, he will have to accept Chinese domination of Russia's Asian territories. We should not push him into making that decision. We also have to recognize something about Putin. The actions that we don't like are the very actions that make him very popular in Russia. Putin is apparently not a very nice man. You may not want him as your son-in-law, your best buddy, or your boyfriend. But in world politics, it's not niceness that matters. It is who you have on your side and what price you have to pay to strengthen yourself as you navigate very treacherous waters. The time when any one nation was strong enough to carry out everything it wanted to do by itself is long gone. This brings me to China. You know the Chinese story. No other nation in modern history has risen from the periphery to the top of world affairs in such a short time, 10 years. But what is less obvious is how skillfully the Chinese had advanced themselves by playing off the policies and mistakes of others. We are the parents of economic globalization, but the Chinese are the primary gainers. The world gets into financial difficulties, the Chinese come out strongest. They're digging up the riches of Africa. Today, over 1 million Chinese are living and working in Africa, but nobody calls them colonialists or imperialists. They have excellent relations with Israel, but they are major traders with Iran. If we mishandle the present global situation, the Chinese will be the biggest beneficiaries. So are the Chinese the supermen of the 21st century? Not so. Their future depends on 3 critical questions and how they respond to it. How they answer these questions will determine the fate of China and the direction of world affairs in the next few years. Question number 1. How well and how long can the government, the party, China, manage the central contradiction of China today? The contradiction between public conformity, even public tyranny, and private liberty. The Chinese can now, average Chinese, can now do pretty much what they want to do in their private life. They've never had so many personal freedoms, the freedom to dress in any style, to enjoy themselves, to be employed as they want, to travel abroad, to live as they like. But public freedom is heavily controlled by political life. Will the growing middle class, a huge middle class for the first time in China, accept these constraints? Can a society liberalizing in private life but authoritarian in public life exist in that way for long? Can you be a little bit pregnant forever? Okay. Will the middle class accept these constraints? Empowered by social media, the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, will the new educated middle class resent this? How will they express themselves? Will they see public conformity as a way in which the rulers cover up corruption, environmental issues, and other flaws? Managing China in the same old way is going to become increasingly difficult. But any new way of managing China means that the government and the party will have to give up some power, which they will not like to do. And if they don't, will more Tiananmen squares come? It's the first question that Chinese have to face. The second fateful question that China has to face is this. In recent years, China has been functioning within the global system, within the global economic system, within the global diplomatic system, within the global political system. It has gained great benefits from this. But now China wants a bigger place in the present system. If it cannot become more important within the system, will it seek to upset the present system? Will they, for instance, upset financial markets through the use of their huge cash reserves? Will they, for instance, force their way onto those disputed islands? Will they, for instance, support various radical groups around the world? How will they use their military buildup? Will they play within the stadium? Or if they don't get what they want, will they try to destroy the stadium? What are the costs of doing that? I don't know what the answer is, and the Chinese themselves are debating this question. But it's a key question for China and the world in the near future. Is their reassertiveness a sign of things to come? And how far will it go? There's a third question for China, which will determine its future. Can the Chinese heartland, the government and the party, continue to control the borderlands populated by minorities and other groups? Tibet, Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia on one side, Hong Kong, and perhaps to some extent Taiwan on the other. There is a great potential for borderland unrest. And if this is not well handled by China, it could seriously upset the political stability of that country and lessen their position in the world. As internal issues arise, as external rivalries grow, what will China do? Will China reach out to its rivals, to America, to India, perhaps eventually even to Japan, as it seems to be doing now with Russia? Or will it resort to confrontation, another Cold War, something like we had with China from 1949 to 1973? These are decisions that China will also have to make. It seems to me that in the long run, the Chinese are our primary concern, not Russia, not even the Middle East, challenging as it is. Because the Chinese challenge our economy, the very bedrock of our strength. And we ourselves now are trying a policy of soft containment of China, strengthening ties to India, to Japan, to Chinese neighbors, initiating trade pacts in the Pacific that exclude China. Should we expand this? Should we try to develop some common agreements with China? Maybe a partnership, maybe constructive cooperation? The present state of Chinese-American relations between number one and number two needs much better management than it is getting at the moment. And this is one of the great long-term issues that we need to address, and they do too, for it will determine who are the winners and losers in world politics in the 21st century. Let me say a word about America itself. There are, broadly speaking, two views of America today. One is that it is a great nation in decline. As Rousseau said, if Greece and Rome could decline, which country is immune from decay? That view is that America is number one, but weakening, and that we are on the way to being like Britain and France, great has-beens. There's another view of America, which is that America has had setbacks, but by reasserting ourselves through bold leadership, we can recover and be the arbiter of world destiny. The indispensable nation, as some people call it. There is some truth in both of these views, but the fact is that we simply cannot do what we did in the past. And if we try to do that, we will get into big trouble. There is a lot we can do, but the world has changed and the old mantras won't work. A thought about bold leadership. As we criticize President Obama, sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly, spare a little pity for him. If you oppose Putin, you could find yourself in Siberia or in an even colder place. If you oppose Xi Jinping, you could find yourself in prison for life, where his rival Bourgilai now is. If you oppose Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, you will lose your head. But poor Obama has to negotiate, has to endlessly cajole, persuade, plead, endure insults from those who oppose him, and it's still difficult to get anything done. Truly, managing America today is a terrible job. There are at least three major disturbing elements in the polity of America today. The first is the growing gap, the growing discontent between society and politics. Our society functions, for better or worse, but it functions. People make decisions, they lead their lives, they go about their business. But politics has become dysfunctional. It is so difficult to get any political decision. Obstruction as a policy has produced paralysis. Everything from approving ambassadorial appointments to passing routine budgets has become a hot issue, a crisis a week. If this gap between society and politics grows, American governance will become a train wreck. Societies have always to integrate politics and the social functioning. The second disquieting thing about America is this. Democratic systems function when they operate on a full tank. If you get miserable voter turnouts, if you get very low public confidence in the three key areas of government, the legislature, our Congress has an approval rating of about 10%, the lowest in history. The Supreme Court has a confidence rating of about 35%. The President has an approval rating of about 38%. It means that the country does not trust its government or is indifferent to the working of the system. Why this turnoff is another question, but if it continues, America will be governed by small groups of unpopular and very rich people, and democracy will be a spectator sport for even smaller numbers of spectators. And then will it be democracy? Will the capitalist autocracy of Russia and China be more successful or more appealing? So, the functioning of democracy is another concern that we have. And third, we talk about nation building around the world. And last night, the President was talking about nation building in Islamic areas. But there's a desperate need for nation building at home, infrastructure, education, public services. If this need is not met fairly soon, we will end up with public services being run by profit-making enterprises, serving only those who can pay, and our services increasingly staffed by non-nationals who are better educated and cheaper to employ than American citizens. These non-profit enterprises, businesses, commercial groups, foreign investors, maybe even semi-criminal systems, if they function well, will be able to dominate our society. In the face of these issues, political paralysis, low or no confidence in government, underfunded infrastructure, can we maintain our position in the world in the future? The tragedy is that these troubles are not necessary. A small improvement in political performance, say 20%, 30%, can change many of these things. An even bigger tragedy is that no major nation in the world is better positioned to do well in the 21st century than America, if it gets its act together. We have at least 5 enormous game-changing advantages and positives. First, our innovation is outstanding, which is why the best and the brightest in the world come here. Second, our energy situation has improved remarkably. We are likely to be the only major industrial state in the world that is energy independent in the next decade, and that's a tremendous achievement. If you think that for decades now, we have been sending huge amounts of money every day to oil producers who don't particularly like us to keep our energy situation going, you realize what an important step this is. Okay. Third, our population mix is the most favorable among the major nations in the world. We don't have too many people like India and China. We don't have too few people like Russia, Japan, and Europe. Fourth, many nations in the world would prefer to ally with us if we manage ourselves well, rather than with Russia, China, or the jihadists. And fifth, we are more open, whether you like it or not, to social change than most other societies. Same-sex marriage, minority rights, gay rights, women's rights, gradually legalizing marijuana, extending social freedoms. And we have made tremendous progress in things like bringing AIDS, HIV under control, and the anti-smoking situation. Our society is a very strong vehicle, but politics is the driver of the vehicle. And right now, we have a powerful vehicle that is being driven by bad drivers, or worse, by no drivers at all. Will this change? Some years ago, I was very pessimistic about this. I thought that we would replicate many of the other great nations in history, from Rome, through Spain, through the Ottomans, through Britain and France in our time, and inevitably decline. I'm now a little more optimistic that we can change. Things like the coming of computer voting, which will be a feature of our polity in the next decade or two, the potential of the social media, and perhaps eventually public disgust at money politics, has the possibility of changing things. But if it takes too long, the problems will become overwhelming. There is one quick opportunity for improvement. That is larger voter turnouts. And that is why the November midterm elections are so important a test of whether the American public can be moved to political action. Remember this: if the voter turnout was higher in recent years, the election results would have been different. A higher voter turnout would certainly have seen Al Gore as president instead of George W. Bush. And what a difference that would have made. Finally, will the outcome from the cauldron of today's world politics, what will it be? What will be the outcome? No, we have to understand that we are children of the 20th century. A century with a very mixed record. The most brutal century in history, and the most advanced century in history. It was a century in which Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela walked alongside Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and Mao Zedong. I think we will see the uncertainties and confusion that we have today continue for a while. But the many positive forces that are working, things like literacy, communications, technical advances, suggest that these positives may eventually contain the damage of political confusion. These are, of course, speculations. I make no provision for black swans. But it is by understanding issues, clarifying them, discussing them, sharing thoughts, that we can turn speculations into intelligent and positive realities. And that is what we try to do at the Center for Global Affairs. By looking at this broad spectrum of world politics, I've tried today to convey my conviction that this is an extraordinary moment in world affairs. Unusually big questions have arisen, and they have to be addressed by major nations. How they are answered by America, by China, by Russia, how the Middle East evolves will impact on world politics for decades to come. Nobody can give you precise answers. And if they do, they're misleading you. Both the long-term and the near-term outcomes of global affairs are works in progress, which makes all of us participants in this rare historical drama. And if you are disconcerted and unhappy at the way things are, and you probably are, don't forget that the good things that are happening are quite considerable. The stream of history contains both crap and champagne. Good times and bad times. We should not get hysterical at bad times or too elated at good times. Nations, like people, do best when they keep a sense of balance and understand their limits. This evening, I have tried to give you some snapshots, a few selections, obviously, with several gaps. If you want to see the movie, come to my classes. I grew up in a part of the world where Mahatma Gandhi was an icon. As a very little boy, I was taken to see him. He greeted us briefly and said, hello, thank you for coming, goodbye. We expected a long sermon, a big discourse from this great sage. So we said to him, please talk some more to us. Tell us something more. Gandhi's answer was this: only speak if you can improve on silence. Only speak if you can improve on silence. I think I've reached that point now. Thank you. Okay.
Those who know me know that I always have the last word. So I told you so, right? It was a wonderful lecture. Please come and see us. Come to our events, take our courses, and learn something about what is in the world today. Thank you so much for coming.